Good morning, my friends. Stout-Hearted 7, Chapter 13. As soon as all the immigrants who were not going to spend the winter here had gone on to the Willamette Valley, Mother announced that school would begin. Perrin and John were deemed too old for school, and besides, the doctor needed them. All the rest, even Louise, would be regular scholars. Mother told them that the teacher, Mr. Hinman, was to have full charge and they must obey him without any question. From the first day, Frank was in trouble. Mr. Hinman demanded steady concentration on their work. To look up and smile at someone across the room was a sin, and he lost no time letting the sinner feel his displeasure, conveying by means of a cane that stood near his desk. So, if you misbehaved back then, you got hit with a stick. They called it a cane, but it was a big stick. You got hit. Fun, mischievous Frank could not resist sticking a foot into the aisle to trip up another boy, or letting a few drops of the water pail drip onto a girl's neck. Even a swift glance from his blue eyes would drive Mr. Hinman into a frenzy, and at the slightest provocation, he had Frank up in the front of the class for punishment. So he had to go up to the front of the class and get hit. Catherine always hid her eyes. If only Frank would yell as the other boys did, the teacher might not be so cruel to him, but Frank refused to cry out. Day by day, the struggle between them grew worse. Other boys were beaten, but none so often or so mercilessly as Frank. Mr. Hinman seemed to take pleasure in keeping all the children in a state of terror. Catherine and Elizabeth indignantly told John how their brother was being treated, but he commanded them to be still. They must not mention it to Mrs. Whitman. Anyhow, she would not believe you, Frank said bitterly. She thinks the teacher is such a fine man that she would not believe a thing against him. So, when Mr. Hinman sat at the table with them, Catherine and Elizabeth kept their eyes on their plates. Mother even commented them on their good behavior. Matilda loved Frank more than anyone else in the whole world, and she longed to tell Father what had happened in school. But when she glanced up, she saw Mr. Hinman's hard, gooseberry eyes fixed on her, and was so terrified she dare not speak. We are all together. That's the important thing, John reminded them later when the children were all done. Frank, you must learn not to play tricks or laugh or even smile when the teacher is around. Frank scowled. I know what I'll do. I'll run away. Frank, you wouldn't, Catherine begged. Just you wait and see. The school week ran from Monday morning to Saturday noon. The rest of the day was a half holiday. The good weather lasted long this year, so on several of those Saturday afternoons, Mother took all the children except Catherine for a ramble over the hills. Catherine became used to staying home and consoled herself by reading while she watched the baby. She specially loved the books of poetry she found in the doctor's bookcases and memorized many of the poems. Just before dark, Mother and the others came home, red-cheeked, smelling of fresh air, and hungry for the Saturday night supper of baked beans, brown bread, and pumpkin pudding, like those both parents remembered from their childhood. Early darkness brought along evenings after supper. Sometimes Father entertained the children with stories of his own boyhood in Rushville, New York, and his later years in Connecticut, where, after his father's death, he had gone to live with an uncle, Freedom Whitman. His grandfather lived there too, making it a household of men. That was when you became so careless about your clothes, Mother teased. Perhaps, he said with a sly wink for the children. Anyhow, my uncle could bake the best beans in the world. Better than mine? Yours are good, wife, but there was just a little something, some trick of seasoning, perhaps. Marcus, you're teasing me. Catherine thought, as she often did, how pretty Mother was when she laughed. At times like this, she seemed to throw off her customary seriousness and became again the fun loving person she must have been before she married Father and came west to be a missionary. She told the children of her own youth in Prattsburg, another New York town, which seemed as far away as China. And when she described her brothers and sisters, Harriet, Phoebe, Jane, and Edward in particular, and the fun they used to have, it was for Catherine a glimpse into another world. Could Mother really have been that girl of whom her own mother had said, "I wish Narcissa wouldn't always have so much company"? Matilda and Louise liked best the evenings when Father made shadow pictures for them. He set a candle where it would throw a shadow on the wall, then began to twist his fingers into all sorts of shapes. On the wall appeared a rabbit with long ears, a squirrel, a frog, or a dog opening and closing its mouth until one half expected to hear it bark. During the week when Mr. Hinman was in charge of the children for many hours of the day, Mother had more time not only for her housework, but for letter writing, her favorite occupation. If she was not disturbed, she would sit at the table for hours writing in her fine, even script across the paper one way, then turning it to write the other way. Catherine wondered how her family could read it, but paper was so scarce that cross writing was necessary if one wanted to say as much as Mother did. She told the children she was urging her parents and her sister Jane to come west. Whenever a traveler stopped at the mission on the way east, she put aside everything else to finish her letters, asking him to post it when he came to the United States. And whenever anyone arrived from the east, the first thing she wanted to know was, "Are there any letters for me?" One day, she asked Catherine, "Do you remember any relatives your parents had?" "Mama had a sister, Aunt Hannah." "What was her last name?" Catherine shook her head, and neither John nor Frank could remember anything about Aunt Hannah. They had heard Papa speak of sisters and brothers somewhere in Ohio, but where they lived or what their names were, they didn't know. "Didn't you ever write letters?" "I guess not," John said. "Too bad. I wish we could let them know about you." Catherine and Elizabeth whispered together at night about this matter of relatives. Wouldn't it be wonderful if someday an aunt or uncle came west and stopped to see them? But it was not likely, they guessed. In spite of the Whitmans' effort to keep their children away from the Indians, Frank made friends with Cayuse boys and sometimes spent the night in one of their lodges. He was very quick to learn the Indians' language, and before long he could understand everything they said. He told the rest of the children they did not like Dr. Whitman because he worked all the time and tried to make them do the same. Men should not work. That was for women. Men were supposed to fish and hunt. When that was done, they had the right to lie around in the sun, smoking and playing the stick games Dr. Whitman said were wrong. Another reason they disliked him, Frank said, was that he would never parley with them. He insisted on instant answers, yes or no, while they liked to talk around a subject before making a decision. Neither did he have any feeling for ceremony. He would always rush, while they never hurried unless they were on a hunt. They disliked Mrs. Whitman, too, saying she was proud and haughty and would not let her children play with theirs. No matter how they shunned any kind of farming themselves, the Cayuse did like the watermelons and pumpkins the doctor raised, climbing over the fence at night to steal them. One time, Mother told the children, when Mr. Gray, the missionary who had built the mansion house, was living there, he got so mad at the Indians for stealing his melons that he plunged several growing near the fence and put in some medicine that would make anyone eating them sick to their stomachs. The Cayuse thought they had been poisoned. She said it was a mistake for Mr. Gray to have done such a thing because the Indians would not forget it and would blame the doctor for it. They had a rule among themselves that if one of their own medicine men did not cure a sick person and that person died, the relatives had the right to kill the medicine man. She was always afraid they would kill father when his remedies did not cure the patients. She did not worry too much about him when he was home, since she did not think the Indians would come into the house to attack him. Often, however, he was called away to one of the mission stations, and on the way he would be fair play. Lapaui, where the Spalding family lived, was 125 miles to the east, and Tukshaman, home of the Walkers and the Els, 160 miles north. The three stations were the points of a huge triangle in which Dr. Whitman was the only physician, and since all the mission families were young people, someone was always having a baby or had a child dangerously ill with whooping cough or scarlet fever. A messenger would come on horseback, and the doctor must go, no matter what the weather or how much he was needed at home. When he started out, his wife knew he might be gone for several weeks. He had to ride horseback alone over open country with no roads but Indian trails, and ford dangerous rivers where a slip of his horse might throw him to his death. In winter, snow hid familiar landmarks, and every foot of the way there was danger. But most of all, Narcissa Whitman dreaded the nights when he was away. Often she asked Catherine to sleep with her. She seemed to forget this was only a 10-year-old child, and poured out to her all the troubles of her heart. Catherine was a willing and sympathetic listener. Once, in the middle of the dark, cold night, the two of them were awakened by weird cries from the Indian camp nearby. Catherine began to tremble, and shivers ran up her back. "What is that awful noise?" "The death chant. Someone must have died. I wonder who it is. I am almost glad the doctor is away. They would have come for him, and then when the patient died, they would have blamed him for it." The cries continued all night. In the morning, a weeping Indian woman came to the door. When she had gone, Mother turned swiftly. "The sick man is the son of one of the chiefs. He is not dead yet, but they think he is dying. Marianne, run down to the cellar and bring me 2 large onions." She built up the fire, sliced the onions into a pan of water, and set them to cook. As the room filled with the pungent fumes, she spread out on the table strips of old flannel, topped by a rectangle of worn cotton cloth. As soon as the onions were heated thoroughly, she spooned them onto the cloth and folded it with the flannel strips around it. "Catherine, will you come with me to the Indian camp?" Catherine shivered. "But Mother, if the man dies, won't the Indians kill us?" "Our lives are in God's hands," she replied. They wrapped shawls around their heads and shoulders and set forth in the snow. At the Indian lodge, Mother went straight to the side of the sick man who lay on a buffalo robe, gasping for breath. She opened his buckskin shirt and clapped the hot onion pullet on his chest and neck, binding it with strips of flannel. He choked and struggled, but she held him firmly until he calmed down. Then she spoke a few words of instructions to the weeping women standing around and beckoned to Catherine. On the way home, she said, "He has quinsy. His throat was swelled almost shut." When they reached the house, when she stopped and held up one finger, "Listen." "What is it, Mother?" "Haven't you noticed? The death chant has stopped. He must be breathing better. I thought he would. Nothing like an onion pulse." She smiled mischievously, and Catherine found it hard to remember that this was the same woman who had been so frightened in the night. Some of the immigrant children in the school began to talk about Christmas. The Sager children had always loved Christmas in Missouri. Papa came from a German family who had made much of the holiday in the old country and had brought their customs with them. The children had hung up their stockings before the fireplace, and in the morning found them stuffed with presents. Simple gifts made by Papa and Mama, but they carried the magic of Christmas. Papa made taffy, which he pulled over a hook, and they sang German carols and had a jolly time. With the pleasant memories in mind, Catherine timidly asked Mother if they might hang up their stockings on Christmas Eve, as the immigrant children were going to do. "Christmas is a pagan celebration," Mother said sternly. "We'll have none of that in this house." So they didn't celebrate Christmas. Catherine crept away, feeling as if she had done something terribly wrong. Her brothers reacted angrily when she told them that what Mother had said. All day on December 25th, Franklin sat glumly in his seat in the almost empty schoolroom and hardly spoke at meals. Only a week later, on New Year's Day, things were different. Mother and Father believed it was a day for enjoyment and starting all over again. Mother cooked a feast with minced pie for dessert. She had saved some of the dried apples Father had brought in from Vancouver and put in a few raisins as well. The family so seldom had either cake or pie. A meal this great was a treat. It had taken more than minced meat pie to raise Frank's spirit in the new year, however. As the months passed, Mr. Hinman continued to beat Frank, while Mother told the girls that their progress in reading, spelling, and arithmetic proved that he was a fine teacher. John still urged Frank to hang on for the sake of keeping the family together, but as February turned to March and March to April, Catherine knew her younger brother was now nearing the end of his endurance. So poor Frank. He's not going to last much longer being beaten like that. All right, my friends, that was chapter 13. Have a great day. Bye.